You have Abraham. He is the father of our faith. We met Abraham the other night as well and talked about him from Genesis 20. And it was out of that came that I thought sermon. But again, Abraham's not a sinlessly perfect man by any stretch. You know that he lied about his wife twice. You know that he took Lot and that he took his dad out of Ur of the Chaldees instead of leaving the family and kindred behind and all those things. Nevertheless, you know that Abraham is on the rise here, and just within a few mere chapters, 4 chapters, he's going to do that thing which leaves him to become known as the friend of God, because he's going to offer Isaac be willing to offer Isaac on the altar. Is that right? And so here's Abraham, and again he's rising to prominence, and rightfully so. One day outside his tent on the plains of Mamre, it says in verse 1 of chapter 18, he's in his tent, and all of a sudden there are 3 men that appear, and he immediately knows it's the Lord. Now, I don't know, I doubt very seriously that those 3 men had left a dust trail. I think that they appeared somewhat like Christ must have appeared, on the road to Emmaus, where he didn't have to run around and jump in front of those guys, having traversed 3 or 4 miles to get in front of them. I think he appeared from behind a lilac bush, having just appeared there, and so here he was. And those guys just appeared at Abraham's door. And through that whole passage, it's interesting that the Bible says at the end of the chapter, notice verse 33, and the Lord went his way as soon as he had left communing with Abraham. So the Lord called what he did with Abraham that day communion. He communed with him. It's interesting that communion, we have sometimes preconceptions of what something means. I don't know what you think about when you think about fellowshipping with God. I don't know if you, contemplate that maybe something you really, really want to happen, like Abraham dickering with the Lord, dickering the Lord down from being willing to kill all of Sodom regardless, to saying, now if you find 50, will you spare him? And if you find 40, will you spare him? And will you find 30, will you spare him? If you find 20, if you find 10. And each time the Lord says, yes, if I find that many, I will spare them. So here is Abraham dickering the Lord down. And by the next verse, in verse 33, the Lord calls that communing. Now that just means that I don't know what your preconceptions are of what kind of relationship, praying Hyde had with the Lord, or whoever you look up to as a prayer warrior had with the Lord. But a lot of what folks have with the Lord looks at may be different than we do. And here is Abraham begging the Lord to not destroy Sodom if he finds so many people, and then so many less, so many less, so many less. And the Lord called that communion. Kind of interesting. Now, the next step you have now, you know that you were saved according to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 9. You were called when you were saved into fellowship with his Son. What your life should revolve around right now is, sure, it's service and those things, but you have the capability now in something you had no capability for when you were lost, and that is the fellowship with his Son. You have the opportunity to fellowship with God. And so Brother Peacock started off with Psalm 51, and we end tonight with Abraham and Lot. And I want to show you 2 different kinds of fellowship. We go from Abraham when we look at Lot, and you read here what Lot did in chapter 19. I might call to your attention and just your memory what the Lord said about Lot in 2 Peter chapter 2, where it says that just Lot vexed his righteous soul, right? That just Lot was a righteous man who vexed his own soul in seeing and hearing that wickedness that he saw and heard. We live in a day and have more than ample opportunity to see and hear stuff that might vex our righteous soul. Amen? So here is Lot in that scenario, and he's a saint, plainly. You can't make Lot anything but a saint. He's a just man. He's a righteous man. He vexed his righteous soul. He's a saint, and I'm not going to get into dispensations and all that kind of stuff. You don't need that. But For that saint, there was a disastrous deadline that was very near. And he's a backslidden saint. He has dirtied himself there. And the Lord sat at both those men's tables just over a period of very short time. Chapter 18, chapter 19. And I just have you tonight place those two chapters side by side in your mind and read them in your mind and reflect on the variance of those two different kinds of fellowship. I'd like to preach to you tonight a message called A Tent in Mamre. It says that Abraham's tent was pitched in Mamre. First of all, with regard to Abraham's fellowship in chapter 18, verse 1, the Lord came by out of, I guess you could call it friendship. The fellowship was based on a friendship that certainly would come to fruition later by Genesis 22. Abraham did that thing which allowed him to become known as the friend of God. And the Lord apparently likes Abraham's fellowship because there came a day the Lord just shows up at Abraham's tent door and just shows up, just pops in. Now, I don't know if the Lord does that for me or not, but Abraham had become a pilgrim. He had brought some kindred along, but he had left his country, and he had become a pilgrim because the Lord said, I want you to go wander. I'll show you when I want you to stop. And ladies and gentlemen, for me and you, we're called to be strangers and pilgrims in this life. The roots aren't supposed to go very deep. I was raised in Texas and spent 3 years in Pensacola, and I've been in Minnesota ever since. So I've been 35 years in Minnesota now, almost. And if somebody asked me, Texans always ask, well, do you ever miss Texas? I go, not really, because Minnesota's home now. We've been here. We had all our kids in Minnesota, raised all our kids in Minnesota. Most of our grandkids are in Minnesota, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I really don't have a problem leaving the house that I live in today if the Lord calls us to go somewhere else or calls us home, right? You're called to be a pilgrim. And so the Lord stops by this old pilgrim's tent door and just shows up one day, just pops in. And I try to picture what that must have been like. Abraham's inside the door there, and he's been paying attention. He didn't see anybody coming. There's no dust cloud. There's no clattering of horses' hooves or anything. And then he glances away, and then instantly there's three guys standing there. He goes, oh, Lord, like that. And I know that Abraham was a pilgrim. I know furthermore with regard to Abraham that he was willing to believe the impossible. The Lord said, hey, Abraham, you've been praying about children. You wonder if you're going to have to allow your servant to become your heir. And I'm telling you right now that as a 90-plus-year-old man with a wife that's 90-plus years old, I'm going to give you a son through your own loins. In fact, come out here with me, and walked outside the tent and said, look up in the sky and see if you can count the stars, because that's how much your seed's going to be. He said, you believe that? And Abraham goes, yeah, like that. And you have to appreciate that. There's things miraculous in the Word of God that folks have believed. Ever think about Joseph? I'm talking about Joseph and Mary here, where Joseph, I think I mentioned it the other night, if your fiance is with child and it wasn't you, then it was somebody else. But the Lord shows up and says, hey, Joseph, it wasn't anybody else. It was me. So you should go ahead and marry her. Don't worry, she's still pure. I did that. He said, Joseph, do you believe that? And Joseph goes, yeah. Joseph's relieved. It's kind of cool, But here is the Lord shows up to Abraham's place, and Abraham has believed the impossible. There's something else Abraham did. He trusted God for supply. How would you like to pack up your household and your family and everything that you have and count on just wandering from place to place until God said stop? And the Lord had provided something for him everywhere that he had been. And so they sat that night in the tent door there in Mamre, and they spoke, and they ate, And the Bible itself says they communed together as they talked about this thing with how many folks would have to be present. Righteous people would have to be present in, Sodom before the Lord would spare the city. And Abraham got him down to 10 people. And Abraham said, okay, that's good enough. We've been through 5 or 6 rounds of dickering, and so I'm satisfied with that. And they sat in there and they communed and enjoyed each other's company. Now I need you to break from that scene and think about what happened for Lot in Genesis chapter 19. Because in Genesis 19, Lot is sitting in the city gate, and these 2 fellas show up. He recognizes them, I think, as angels. And right away, he runs to them because he really doesn't want them to see what's in that city. Now, the Lord had told Abraham, he said, I'm going to go down there and see if what is going on with the city matches with the cries that are coming from the city. And when I go, I'm going to destroy it. And from there, Abraham dickered the Lord down from 50 righteous souls down to 10. And Lot is standing there in that tent door, and you realize the fellowship here. God showed up to Abraham's door because he was his friend, and he just wanted the fellowship. He was willing to sit and talk with Abraham because he wanted to. It was friendship. Lot's basis for fellowship, the Lord's basis for going to Lot for fellowship was something else. It was an obligation. Now, it was essentially a rescue mission, Now, those are not the same things. You understand? Here's what I'm getting at. Saints find themselves in circumstances and scenarios. I told you that, I got saved at 10 years old and didn't grow, and so I went off into, junior high school and high school. In high school, I was a jock. I was an athlete. Went to college on a partial athletic scholarship, and so I ran with the athletes there, and the football players and the basketball players and and everybody. I went as a shot putter for what it's worth, and I ran with those guys. And of course, you wouldn't have known at a certain juncture in my life. At that juncture in my life, you wouldn't have guessed that I was a Christian, because my mouth was as filthy as anybody that was lost, and there were some things that I was wrestling with inside, I'll say that. But, Christians find themselves in situations, and the Lord shows up in hospitals to comfort the saints. The Lord shows up in jail when a saint needs comfort. I don't question for a moment that the Lord shows up into the prison where a guy's gotten saved, or if he was saved, he committed some heinous thing and wound up in jail. I don't question for a minute that the Lord shows up in jail to comfort a saint. Do you? I think about mistakes that I've seen Christians make. I've seen a young man who was raised on the mission field and could speak 2 or 3 different languages come back to the States as a late teenager, and he's going to go to college and stuff. Instead, he gets mixed up, leaves home on the mission field and doesn't come home to the church that he grew up in. Wound up off into drugs, wound up with a record with the police. Took him 3 or 4 years to get out of the state that he was in order to be able to get back home where he could get help. Wound up in jail, various things. I could just go on, but drugs and stuff like that. And that at this juncture, that young man is in our church with his wife, and they're doing good because the Lord came and met him at a rough, dark place in his life, in the wreckage of an ungodly decision. Here is, for that matter, Paul. Lord told Paul, do not go back to Jerusalem. Do not go to Jerusalem. 3 times. Do not go to Jerusalem. Paul went to Jerusalem, and before anything was accomplished, he got arrested. And so now he's in jail, and they're going to ship him off to somewhere. And I'm sure Paul is sitting there in that jail with his head between his knees going, man, did I ever mess this up? And you know what the Lord did in Acts chapter 23, verse 11? He shows up and says, hey, Paul, I told you not to go to Jerusalem. And Paul said, I know. He said, Paul, and you know what he said? He said, be of good cheer, because as thou hast been a witness to me in Jerusalem, I'm going to send you to Rome to be a witness for me. Just like I told you to be when we started this, and you shouldn't have gone to Jerusalem. But hey, Paul, you're in jail, but be of good cheer. Now, folks, what I'm trying to get at with this is, if I don't plan to, if I ever mess up and I wind up in a dark place and a dirty place, I want the Lord to come get me. Don't you? I've seen him rescue people that have gone there. And make no mistake, I'm not suggesting that I want to. I don't intend to. This is not, I hope, a prophecy of some sort. But if I get somewhere dirty, nasty, and skanky, morally, spiritually, or otherwise, I want the Lord to come find me. Right? And so I'm not denouncing that. But I am saying this. Before you go into the alley where he has to step over a few puddles of vomit to get to you, to rescue you, would you do me a favor? Would you do him a favor? Would you do you a favor? Would you do the brethren a favor? And remember the tent in Mamre? Because those are the grounds you're supposed to fellowship on. I mean, thank God he'll come into a jail and lift me up if that's what I need. Thank God for it. But my fellowship with God is not supposed to be in a jail where I've done something wrong. My fellowship with God is supposed to be in a tent in Mamre. Abraham's fellowship was based out of friendship. The Lord came by out of friendship. And with Lot, the Lord came by out of obligation. It was a rescue mission. There's a difference in those two scenarios. I'd like to say further in Genesis 18, you can tell the Lord showed up voluntarily. There was no compunction for him to show up. He could have gone and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah without asking Abraham, but he showed up there voluntarily. And Abraham's doing something else, as you saw there, and the Lord just appeared out of nowhere. It says in Genesis chapter 18, it's interesting. I stop and think and try to imagine in my mind what it must have been like. And he lifted up his eyes, verse 2, and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. I mean, they just appeared kind of out of nowhere, and maybe that's exactly what it was like. And you can tell from this point that when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground and said, my Lord, again addressing them as one, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. I mean, he's breaking a leg to do all that he can to make sure the Lord stays for a little while. I mean, I didn't see you there. I'm really sorry. Let me kill a calf. Please let me kill a calf. We were going to eat in a little while. And I mean, the Lord said, well, do as you say. And I mean, Abraham is immediately, Sarah, we got 3 extras for dinner tonight. Get some extra potatoes on and get this thing going. Go ahead and kill the calf because we're going to get this thing going. The Lord's here to eat with us. And I mean, he broke a leg to do all that he could to get the Lord to stay, because the Lord came voluntarily. The Lord came because he desired fellowship. Now, I want to ask you if you have a place to go, that you can go, where you know the Lord desires your fellowship. I bet there's a place that has regular meetings set up, and the attempt, if you'll go, is to set an atmosphere that maybe wasn't even all that possible at Abraham's tent, where there can be music, and there can be others, and there can be singing, a congregation singing. There will be Bible lessons and Bible stories and Bible preaching. I wonder if you're as anxious to get where the Lord is and keep him there as he is, because Abraham was. Now, it was different with Lot. Because while the Lord showed up voluntarily in Sodom, Lot is God's child too. He's a just man. He's a righteous man. And, of course, the Lord's interested in him. But, he has to go to Sodom out of necessity now. After all, Abraham talked him into rescuing the place if he could find 10 just people, and he feels an obligation to Lot. And so, Lot, the Lord went there because Lot was a necessity. Okay? I don't want to get in a place where the Lord is obligated to come. That's a shame. I don't want to get in a place where the Lord goes, well, yeah, I got to go. I would rather him show up at my tent door going, hey, you want to talk? And that's the difference between Lot and the tent in Mamre. Lot had to get him to stay. Lot was panicked from the very start. 19:1, there came two angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate at Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. He's got to get to them because he knows what's going on in that city. He gets them by the arm and immediately starts telling them, I pray you, verse 2, turn into thy servant's house and tarry all night and wash your feet. Ye shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they say, nay, we abide all night in the street. And he's saying, come on, guys, let's go. Let's go. We got to get inside. It's getting dark, and supper will be ready. So come on, let's go. And he says, and then you can go to bed, and then you can get right back up in the morning and leave really early. Because he does not want them in the city. Because he knows who they are, and he knows what's in the city. And so, this is an ugly scene. And so these guys say, no, we want to just walk around for a while. He says, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Because, see, the Lord is obligated to come to Lot. It's forced. It's out of duty. Just him being God, him being your father. He's going to come to the jailhouse. He's going to come to a dirty place. He's going to come to a dirty alley and to try to recover you. But you take and compare that dirty alley where you shed tears over the Lord's mercy and tenderness and hope that he can manage to clean you up enough to get you out of town. Compare that scene to a tent in Mamre. Boy, there's a difference. I'd like to say that the other thing about Abraham's fellowship is that it was a sanctified fellowship. Abraham is in a tent in Mamre. He is set apart from Sodom. He is separated from Lot. He is separated from his kindred. He's separated from his people. He has believed God at an extraordinary level about an extraordinary promise that he has no way of verifying till it happens. But whatever else can be the case, he's got his tent pitched in a place that's sanctified and far, far away from the rancid music and the lights of Sodom. And so, it's a sanctified place. He even separated from Lot, as I said. Now, Lot, it's not the same. Lot dwells in a compromised place. And the Lord, I have a picture in my mind of the Lord, or rather of Lot, grabbing both of those angels by the arms and basically forcing them, to his front door, throws the key in the lock, unlocks the door, and shoves the guys in front of him, and they're standing there in the little foyer, the little entryway. He says, honey, a couple of extra guests for dinner. And she's like, what? He hears her from the kitchen say, what? And she comes around the corner and goes, oh. She said, honey, we weren't planning anything for dinner. We were gonna get pizza. And he said, no, we're not going to do that tonight. You need to go ahead and get this squared away. You need to go ahead and fix supper. And so he takes and she goes back in the kitchen murmuring, and he takes them into the living room where there's a 70-inch color TV, and there's stuff on the TV. Oh, boy, oh, Lord. And so he was running around looking for the remote and finally finds the remote, shuts it off. Okay, you guys sit down. And meanwhile, upstairs, you ever been next to one of those cars that's going That's what it sounds like upstairs, and music blaring and rock and roll and stuff. And he goes over to the stairwell and says, hey, girls, hey. Finally, one sticks her head out and he says, shut that music off. Get down here and help your mother fix supper. She goes, Dad, we were going to go out tonight. I have a date. He says, get your tail end down here. Shut that music off. And the girl comes down stairs and she's grumping and sullen, and she finally pops down far enough to be able to see underneath the stairwell where these two guys, strange men, are sitting in the living room. And she goes, oh. Meanwhile, she clumps into the kitchen and you can hear furious whispering in there. Who are those guys? I don't know. Why? What are we going to make for supper? I don't know. Just shut up and peel the potatoes. And there's another daughter up there, and she comes down too, and he has to rail on her for a while. And so he's sitting now there in the living room with these two guys. There's a 70-inch color TV sitting there that's off now, and they have nothing to talk about. What's Lot going to talk to the Lord about? Right? I mean, he has to walk around what he's doing for a living. He has to walk around why he came here. So they're sitting there really uncomfortable with their legs crossed and their hands in their laps going, because they have nothing to talk about. That wasn't the case with Abraham, And so finally, it takes an hour to get an unplanned supper together. And they sit down at the table, and the daughters are going, why do we have to sit at the table? Can we go upstairs? No, you set your tail end down here. You stay down here. And one of them starts to dig into the potatoes, and Lot slams her hand down and says, we have to pray first. She said, why? Because they ain't been praying. And so they have a really uncomfortable prayer, and, Lot would have given one of those Catholic prayers, Good bread, good meat, eat. Good bread, good meat, good gosh, let's eat, or something like that, And they had a really uncomfortable meal because nobody had anything to talk about. And, of course, in the middle of all this, they're sitting there, and there's stuff going out on the street. You know full well that there were some guys that came to the door, and the Lord had to blind them. But meanwhile, they've also encountered fights. There's a bar across the alley, and there's a fight broke out there, and the angel said, what in the world is that? And Lot said, oh, they're always doing that. The police will be here after a while to take care of it. But it's just a loud, raucous, slimy, dirty place. And you see, the Lord showed up to Abraham's to a sanctified place. But because of Lot's relationship with God, and God felt obligation to come to him, he's got to come to Lot into an unsanctified and dirty place. And I'm just asking you to put those two scenes side by side and then ask yourself where you are, and to remember that the proper place is a tent in Mamre, not at a townhome in Sodom. And the Lord will come get you, but it won't be the same. That's the kind of fellowship that none of us need. I want to say that Abraham's relationship with, or fellowship with the Lord was revelatory. And by revelatory, I mean the Lord had something special to show him. He questions whether he should, in fact. Look in Genesis chapter 18. In verse 17, the Lord knows what he plans to do, and he says, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? He says, should I hide it from him? And obviously he decided he wouldn't. Told Abraham, look, I'm going to destroy Sodom. And from that sprung the conversation, well, if you find 50, you're still going to destroy it? No. If I find 50, I won't. Well, 40? No, if I find 40, I won't. Well, 30, 20, 10, finally 10. Okay, well, that'll be enough. Lot will still be able to get out and all that kind of thing. But the fellowship was revelatory. That is, there was a revelation to it. Haven't you found that if you're praying and reading your Bible in any way but the old way of just reading just to be able to put a check in the box? Don't you find that when you read with comprehension and thinking about what you're doing, that the Lord shows you something? It wasn't that long ago, not long ago at all, that I was just kind of going through. The brother this morning was talking about a dark time. It was just a discouraging thing. And so I'd laid awake the better part of the night, really wrestling what in the world is going on and why did this happen the way it happened and all that. Next morning I got up, still kind of broken-hearted about it, really, and prayed for a while, and then got up and opened my Bible. And almost the first thing that I saw in there was, oh, there's the problem. Lord said, yep, that's the problem. You know, you'll find that your fellowship with the Lord is a flower that blooms and blossoms and unfolds if you're serious about it. And you're in a sanctified place. And it's not just the Lord doing the best he can to keep you out of trouble. You ever had, I hope that none of you guys are like this, teenagers, you run up on a teenager once in a while and it just seems they're bent to trouble. And it's all the parents can do and whoever else can do just to keep them from doing something stupid. And that's kind of like Lot. That's kind of like the Lord showing up with Lot. Lot's in the process of diffusing and destroying his life. And the Lord's just trying to stop him. And so he shows Lot a couple things too. What he shows Lot, really, the only thing he showed Lot was that Lot was sitting on the railroad tracks and a train was coming. Because that's what happened to Sodom, right? There's a long distance from Lot sitting on the railroad tracks of God's wrath to the Lord showing up at Abraham's place saying, hey, can we talk a while? Right? Put those two pictures side by side. Which do you want? I used to live by the railroad tracks. We built a house years ago in Minneapolis, and the lot that we picked was pretty close to the railroad tracks. So the crossing was just down the way, and so usually the train started blowing the whistle right about our house. And one thing that I learned through that period of time was a tremendous respect for trains. Because boy, I tell you what, it would come rumbling by and the whole house would just shake. My water bottle up here right now, you can't see the water, it's shaking like that. And that's what our house would do. You could look at the water on the counter of the house and it's going like that. Sitting on the railroad tracks is not a good place to sit. And that's what Lot had revealed to him. And I just think back to some of the time of my life that was such a disaster as a young man, and I was sitting in the middle of the railroad track. I was saved at 10, so I wasn't going to go to hell, but I know a lot of folks that ruined their lives and didn't go to hell. You know what it all boiled down to? It all boiled down to the quality of their fellowship with God. And they weren't meeting with God in a tent in Mamre. I would say that Abraham's fellowship with God was also profitable. By profitable, I mean that something was accomplished in the tent in Mamre that changed how God was going to do something. Because God started out, he's going to go just destroy Sodom. By the time he leaves the tent in Mamre, he's saying, okay, if I can find 10 righteous souls, I won't destroy it. Now, Lot was given a temporary rescue. And then there was a train wreck that still happened because now his wife looks back and she's a pillar of salt. He decides he would rather go to Zoar than the mountains, but he sees going on in Zoar the same things that's going on in Sodom. And so he asks to be able to go and hide in a cave. He goes and hides in a cave. You know what happened in the cave. Lot became a drunk and, as you know, fathered children by his own daughters. So in the end, it was unprofitable for the Lord that he even rescued Lot. Now, folks, I've lamented before where I took my life when I didn't grow as a young Christian and those sort of things. And like I said, it's one thing to read a story about somebody who was saved in jail or got right in jail, those sort of things. It's another thing for somebody that maybe sits here tonight who's had the training that you've had, who's had the loving mother and father that many of you young'uns have had, and they've given you music lessons, they've had you in Sunday school and church for all this time. You have a pastor that's preaching all the time, you have a pastor that loves you, and all those things. It'd be a horrible thing for you to go to Sodom and for the Lord to have to come to find you there and have to step across 2 puddles of vomit and down a dark alley and get stuff all over his shoes to find you sitting in your own urine to pick you up and carry you out. And all the time what you've had before you is this picture of a tent in Mamre. Where the high up mountains flow down into the foothills, and the melt water, by the time it gets down that low, is a little warmer than it was when it started. And there you are at night, and you're looking at this scene, and the fog, a little bit of mist off those creeks, that those water courses starts creeping up fingers up towards those foothills. And up on that foothill, you see a very faint light till you get closer. And set up in a little grove of trees, a little copse of trees up in there, there's 2 or 3 tents. Maybe there's a cooking tent, a kitchen tent. Maybe there's a tent for the servants, and there's a tent for Abraham and for Sarah. And as you walk up towards that, you hear the cicadas singing in the trees. Once in a while, hear an owl kind of hoot, kind of murmur. We have hoot owls at our house out in the woods, and they make this rather actually comforting sound, kind of like a purring kitten or something like that. And so you hear that, and you're approaching this encampment. You hear the bleating of a sheep here or there, a bleating of a lamb out there that's gotten separated from its mother, but the mother quickly finds it, so the little lamb quits bleeding. And you walk into that camp, and as you walk past one tent where Sarah's preparing something for supper, you hear her humming gently, and you walk on and look around and to the other tent, and there you see a scene that you ought to desire to emulate. You have Abraham sitting across the fire from this being, from the Lord. And there's this big sheepdog in between them. And Abraham has his foot on the sheepdog. And the Lord's sitting there, with his foot against the sheepdog, just kind of rubbing it, And those 2 guys are talking. And you're watching Abraham and the Lord fellowship in a tent in Mamre. And I hope that would be something that you would aspire to, because that's a different place than, thank God the Lord will come after me. I believe he will come after me if I mess up. And I'm capable of messing up. I have been dirty before, and the Lord came and found me. He came and found me in college. The stuff that was on my walls in my room were not a place worthy for him. The things that I'd said, the things that I'd done, the things that I had seen, the things that I'd listened to are shameful. But he came and found me. And it was not that long after that I decided to go to Bible school, because for the first time I was getting fed the Bible. And all those years of being saved, I was for the first time being fed the Bible. And I didn't go to Bible school to try to become a preacher. I went to Bible school because I was hungry. I had fulfilled all 4 years, really 5 years, of what essentially is pre-med. I was going to be a physical therapist. I'd been accepted into physical therapy school, which was pretty exclusive. Hardly anybody ever got in their first time, so I'd had to apply twice. And each year they usually accepted only 8 or 10% of the folks that applied. And I'd already gotten word that I had been accepted into PT school. But I knew I was going to be miserable in PT school. I mean, I'd worked with PTs and seen them, and I knew it wasn't going to do the trick for me. And so, believe me, my parents, my grandparents didn't understand when I said, I'm not going to PT school. I'm going to PBI. What are you going to do there? I'm going to learn the Bible. Boy, I had one PT, physical therapist that I'd used for a reference. He pitched a fit. He said, you are being an idiot. You are being a fool. All I knew is that I wanted to get to a cleaner place because the Lord had to come and find me in a dirty place. And I honestly can't tell you that every day of my life that I've been been in the tent of Mamre, but that's my desire. And I'll tell you what, the fellowship there is sweet. And it's a lot different fellowship than an alleyway in Sodom. I hope you'll aspire to a fellowship, a tent in Mamre. Let's bow our heads. Now, Father, tonight we would